"Have you seen him?" I laughed. Leave it to Mark to toss social graces out the window. "Who?" I asked. Pretty sure I knew who he was talking about, but wanting to be sure. "The creepy guy who sits in the cafeteria at night. He's been in there 3 nights running, and I damn near thought he was a ghost the first time." "Yeah, I've seen him. Hell, I've talked to him a few times. You should go introduce yourself next time. He's a nice guy." Carl wandered up about that time, asking if I wanted a break, and I found that I did. "I'll call you back, Mark. It's break time for me. Come down to the cafeteria sometime and I'll introduce you to him. I think you guys would get along." Mark said that he would, and after hanging up, Carl asked what all that had been about. "Oh, someone else looking for info on that guy that's lurking in the cafeteria at night." He laughed. "Seems like everybody's too scared to say hey." He told me to enjoy my break, and I told him I'd do my best. I remembered the night I had met the mysterious new specter that haunted the halls of Cashmere Hospital. It had been early evening. The night had been pretty calm until that point, and suddenly the doors on the ambulance bay across the way had burst open, and the EMTs had come in with an older guy on a stretcher. There was a fella in jeans and a t-shirt behind him, looking worried and following close, and I'd gone back to my work as they moved on. I hadn't thought a lot about it at the time, but when someone asked me which way to the cafeteria, I looked up to see the same guy from before. He looked tired, and he looked like he needed to talk. So we started talking. When it came time for my break, I showed him the cafeteria personally. I was coming down to get coffee, a nightly ritual of mine, when I saw David peeking around the corner at something in the cafeteria. He was being careful not to be seen by whatever he was looking at, but I suspected whoever he was looking at had already seen him. I snuck up on him, and he jumped as I put a hand on his shoulder, grinning as he saw me. "Jesus, you scared me half to death," he said, putting a hand to his chest as he tried to catch his breath. "Kinda game are you stalking, oh mighty hunter?" I teased, glancing around the corner. He looked like he thought he was about to say something ridiculous, but he was powering through it. "Well, this place is full of spooks, you know, and I thought maybe this guy was one too." I laughed, telling him if he wanted an introduction, I'd be happy to give him one. David seemed surprised. "Oh, are you a ghost whisperer now?" "No, but that guy's as flesh and blood as you and me." He looked up, smiling sadly at me as he saw me coming in. He was a guy in his mid-20s, dressed in comfortable dark clothes with a strange symbol hanging around his neck. He spoke very well, very intelligently for someone his age, and he drank his coffee black, a man after my own heart. "David, this is Marcus Carmichael. His granddad's on the 3rd floor, and he likes to take his coffee breaks late, like I do, so we've been talking." Marcus had been here for about 3 days, and he didn't get far from his grandpa's side. I'd found him wandering around one night, mostly just looking lost, and had asked him what he was doing. He told me the place had a strange feel to it, like there were bees under the walls, and I knew exactly what he was talking about. Ever since becoming aware of this place and the spirits that lived here, it always feels like there's a low current through the walls, and it was something that was hard to get over. Having someone to talk to about it helped a lot, and that's how we had started hanging out during my breaks. We would sit and talk, swapping stories about our adventures and the strange lives that we had lived. He told me that he and his grandpa lived in the hills outside of town, and the mountains he called home were very strange. He talked about weird creatures in the woods, strange entities that made the ghosts in the hospital seem tame, and his stories were some of the best I'd ever heard. I contemplated adding them to the book, but they deserve to have a book all their own. It was kind of nice that David had seen him too, because I was kind of wondering if he was a ghost. "So, this is one of the guys you've been hunting ghosts with?" "Yeah, maybe I can get you the rest of them down here at some point or another, let you meet the whole gang." He asked David about the weird stuff he'd seen, and David told him about the boiler man and the guy on 3 North that had been working on the power. Marcus nodded along, interested in the idea of so many ghosts being present here, and told a few of his own stories about the weird creatures he'd seen and the ones that Grandpa had told him about. When I checked my watch, I realized I'd been gabbing for about half an hour, and David said that he had to get back to work too, and the two of us left him there with his coffee and his thoughts. "He's an interesting fella," David said. "You think those stories are true? He's got some pretty fantastic ones." "I mean, are they really any weirder than ours? Sure, he's fought creatures, but the ghosts here are certainly no picnic either." David agreed as we parted ways, and Carl was glad to see me come back. "Was worried maybe the ghosties had got you. That or you'd taken another elevator ride to nowhere." I told him that David and I had been in the cafeteria with our newest lurker, the guy in the dark coat who had been around for the last few days. "Oh yeah, nice enough kid. I talked with him a few times, he and his grandpa. They both seemed pretty all right." I hadn't looked up his gramps, mostly out of respect, but also because I didn't know his name, but I was curious as to which room he was in. I feel now like I should have known, but it was still a bit of a shock when Carl told me that he was the newest resident of room 301. "You're kidding me," I said, especially after we'd had so much trouble out of it recently. "Nope. I tried to talk them out of it, but they refused to close down the room. They say it doesn't make sense to shut down a room that could pay my salary and yours for a month with nothing but a week's stay." "Sounds like the real problem might be the growing cost of health care," I joked. "Hardy har har," Carl said sullenly. "But no, the problem is definitely the missing people. A couple more and we could be in real trouble. That's what the stuff shirts keep saying. They keep threatening my job too, if I don't get some results." I chewed that over. "Maybe they can help us get some results. Did you tell them about the weirdness when you spoke to them?" "Oh, sure. I'll be making flyers. Come to Stagview Hospital. Stay in room 301. Get disappeared to strange and exotic locales. No, I sure as hell didn't tell them. Seemed like a great way to get our asses sued." Do you mind if I talk to him about it?" He thought about it. "I suppose it couldn't hurt. If the head of the security goes around telling people about these things, then sets bad precedent. But if you talk about it, then, well, might be taken a little better." When I got off in the morning, I headed to the cafeteria. Marcus never missed an omelet bar day, and sure enough, he was right at the head of the line. "Twice in one day," Marcus said. "People are going to talk. I've got something to talk to you about, and it's a little weird." "Weird is my bread and butter, partner. Talk to me." So, as he ate his spinach and mushroom omelet, I told him the history of room 301, the missing people, the strange phone calls, the reports from those who stayed there, all of it. It didn't take as long as I'd thought it would, but by the time I was done, Marcus hadn't left or laughed at me or called me crazy, which is pretty much the norm when you talk to regular people about this sort of thing. He chewed it over, the info and the omelet, and seemed to consider what I'd told him. "And you think it could take my grandpa?" he asked, not sounding sarcastic, but sounding resolved. "Wouldn't surprise me at all," I said. "The disappearances have been increasing in frequency over the years, and whatever is taking them seems to be getting desperate. There's another reason why Grandpa could be in trouble," he said, weighing his next words pretty carefully. "I've got something to tell you, too, and it's pretty weird." "Seems like quid pro quo at this point," I told him, and he looked around before starting. "Grandpa and I don't just live in terror of these things. We fight back when we need to. We have abilities that make us a pain in the ass for things that go bump in the woods." I must have looked skeptical because he pressed on. "Grandpa's, well, I don't know what exactly Grandpa is. A wizard, I suppose, but It's beyond that. He knows herbs, he knows runes, he knows real magic, but he also casts out demons like an old fire and brimstone preacher. He knows things, he's wise, and he's taught me a few of those things. What sort of things? Things I can't exactly show you here, but runes mostly. Runes and wards, the ways to protect things. Perhaps something that I could use to keep Grandpa safe, as well as parts of the hospital. That was certainly a thought. If Marcus knew things, like real magic things, maybe we could help each other out. I could talk to the red-clad orderly and get some help, and he could use whatever powers he had to help keep his grandpa safe, and to flush out whatever was in room 301. It would be perfect, if it worked, and could potentially save the hospital a lot of trouble. It's worth a shot, I said. First things first, though, Marcus said, collecting up his tray and heading for the garbage can. We go talk to Gramps and get you properly introduced. I had been feeling a little sleepy, but when he offered to let me meet his grandpa, a legendary figure, if only in his mind, I was suddenly willing to forego some sleep. Hell, even if the guy was delusional or something. He was almost 100 by Marcus's figuring. Meeting him would be a good experience anyway. And I mean, suppose he was actually legit. Who knew what kind of things I could add to my book? Imagine adding some local color from a guy who had actually encountered spirits in the wild. I had to check and make sure I wasn't drooling. Have you got time? He asked, misunderstanding my look. I mean, I know you worked all night, and you probably have to do it again tonight, but if you've got a minute, I know we'd love to meet you. No, I got time. This is actually my day off, so I've got nothing but time. Cool. Well, Grandpa should be eating breakfast by now, so let's go meet him. We headed up the stairs to meet this mysterious old-timer and let him know that his long life could be in immediate danger. Nothing could go wrong there, right? I hung back as we got to the room, still a little hesitant about going in. I knew things about this place, a room that looked like any other, but seemed to have teeth, and I wasn't in a big hurry to go find out if the rumors were true. What if this was some kind of trick to get me in there, right where it wanted me? Did it want me? Maybe that was kind of presumptuous for me to assume, but really seemed like it. Hey, you okay? Marcus asked, looking back at me from the doorway. I was about to give him some lame answer when I heard a voice from inside that I'll never forget. It reminded me of my own grandpa. It reminded me of other people's grandpa. And I suppose that was to be expected. Given what I would come to learn about him, it all made a lot of sense. Who is it, son? Did you bring someone to see me? Did they bring me anything to eat besides this stuff? All my apprehension seemed to run out of me as I heard his voice, and when I walked across the threshold, it was like walking between the rubber buffers on a cooler. It parted, but it did so begrudgingly, and I shivered as I went through it. Marcus nodded as I turned back to look at it, and it was clear that I wasn't the only one who had felt it. It takes some getting used to, he said, though I doubted it was old hat for him either. The man in the bed wasn't what I had expected, but I suppose I might have inflated him in my mind some. It was, after all, hard to be truly spectacular in a hospital gown. I'd expected a wizened old man with a long white beard and piercing blue eyes, the eyes of a man who had seen great and terrible things. What I got was a shrunken old fella, clean-shaven, with a fluff of downy white hair on his liver-spotted head. His eyes were green and free of the cataracts that so many of the other oldsters in the hospital seemed to have. His waist was covered in plaster, the cast thick as it stopped him from doing further harm to himself, and it looked like it would make sleeping pretty uncomfortable. He was old and frail, but there was definitely something about him that made me feel like Marcus's claims weren't so far-fetched. It was like the sound in the walls, a quiet thrumming that seemed to come from him. He reminded me of Yoda, a small man who practically vibrated with energy that I didn't understand. "Well, hello, young man. You don't look like a housekeeper, and you're not wearing the scrubs that the cafeteria people usually wear, so what brings you here?" The remains of his breakfast were sitting on the little tray across his lap, and he slid it away from him with no real regret. Just because they were eating omelets in the cafeteria didn't mean that they were eating them up here on the 3rd floor. The old-timer had a plastic tray with watery eggs, some very questionable-looking sausage, some mixed fruit, and a little oatmeal. I had to agree with the fella. It was a poor breakfast indeed. "I'm John," I told him. "I work downstairs at reception. Your grandson and I have been talking lately, and he's been regaling me with some pretty weird stories. He talks a lot about creatures in the woods and the strange things that his grandpa has seen in his travels." The old man smiled wetly, his teeth going, but mostly still there. "Oh, you can't believe a word of it. He lies like a rug," he said, grinning at Marcus as he came to stand beside him. "Me?" Marcus said. "So you admit that none of this is real, and I'm not just going crazy?" "Oh, we're all going crazy, kiddo. That's how you know you're going about it in the right way." "John," Marcus said, "this is my grandpa. May I introduce you to—" "Gramps, I just realized I don't really know how to introduce you. I've always just called you Grandpa, and people knew who I was talking about." "I suppose he can call me Grandpa if he wants to. Everyone else does, after all. Or Jack, if he doesn't." He extended a hand, and I shook it. "Fair enough, Gramps. I was telling your grandson about some of the oddities inside the hospital." Grandpa snorted. "That's one way to put it. I tell you, I was madder than a wet hen when I woke up to discover that he had let that ambulance take me here. I wanted to go to a hospital in Gainesville, or hell, even Atlanta General would have been a better place than this spook house." "So you know about the ghosts here?" I asked, taking a seat by his bed. Grandpa gave me a look. "Kid, everybody knows about the ghosts here, even if they won't admit it. The ghosts and the spirits of Cashmere Hospital are the worst kept secret in town. The only reason this place isn't some kind of a ghost tour property is because the higher-ups work extra hard to keep it off the radar." "What do you mean?" I asked, gritting my teeth as Marcus pulled out another chair. "Hospitals are places of healing, places where people get better. No one wants to imagine going into a hospital for treatment and being stuck there forever as a shambling horror. It's repugnant, and it would stop people from coming to the hospital at all. The management here probably works full-time to keep the ghoulies here a secret. I imagine they have been quite a few staff that have gone missing too, or worse, over the years." I thought about Francis Garland and David and the doctor who had come running out of the car park and nodded. "The problem isn't that it takes them and kills them," I said, feeling silly even as I said it. "The problem is that sometimes it returns them. It returns them changed or not quite whole." Grandpa looked at Marcus and they shared something for a moment before he turned back. "Sounds like we may have found the right person to talk to. Have you Had a lot of trouble with the entities in the hospital? You could say that. I'm writing a book about all these things, and the stories of all those who have experienced them. Grandpa snorted. Well, this would be the place to do it. Do you happen to know anything about what comes after death, kid? I thought about the red-clad orderly and nodded. Yeah, I might know someone with some insight on that. We've been talking a lot lately, and he's been helping me to understand a little more about the spirit world. Sounds like you and me, Gramps, Marcus said. It's not exactly like that. He's, well, I tried to find a way to say it, but Grandpa hit the nail on the head. You've got a friend on the other side, don't you? I nodded. Yeah, he's a guide. He helps spirits pass over. He's teaching me how to do it too. Grandpa's eyes got wide. A human who guides spirits to the other side. Now that would be a first. I wonder, would you mind if I took a look at the book you're writing? I think I'd like that, I said. Might be nice to have a second opinion on what I'm writing. I'd also like to get your opinion on one story in particular, the one about the room you're currently lying in. Grandpa nodded, laughing again as he poured some water from a pitcher and tried to get comfortable in his cast. Yeah, I thought it felt a little strange in here. Maybe a spirit that was trying to make contact or something. I don't know. Whatever it is, this room hums with latent energy. Maybe you know why. I don't know the whole story myself, but what I do know is that people keep checking in here, and then they don't always check out. Some of it can be chalked up to people slipping out in the middle of the night, but not all of it. People are disappearing from this room, and some of them are being heard afterward in phone calls. It happens to maybe every 1 in 40, but it's starting to get worse. It may be 1 in 38 now. I don't know. But it's going to get even worse before it gets better. The disappearances are appearing a little targeted, too. Such as, Marcus said, women in their 30s or 40s, young men, older people. All of it started after a little girl died in that room, too. At least that's what my contacts say. She's the key, and she's the one that's taking them, we believe. Another look passed between the two of them. I was starting to feel kind of left out. I think we need to meet this mysterious friend of yours. Maybe share some information. If he can help us, maybe we can help him too. I'm not exactly mobile these days, so I guess you'll have to go in my place, boy, he said, patting Marcus on the arm. Goody goody, Marcus said, almost like being a grown-up and getting to go off by myself and stuff. He took his phone out, though, and started texting someone, making me wonder if we would be as alone as I thought. Do you have any way to get in touch with him? Grandpa asked. Not really, but he's in and out, so he shouldn't be that hard to find. It's really just a matter of time. Well, Grandpa said, let's hope we have some of that. We did a little more small talk, and when they started calling out for lunch orders, I realized it might be time for me to get a little sleep, but not before I made a call of my own. Carl picked up on the third ring, and his yawn was huge. Jesus, man. You ever heard of business hours? I might have someone who can help me with your missing person reports for room 301, but I need a favor. Yeah? He asked, and I heard his mattress groan as he sat up. Name it. Have you got someone on right now who knows anything about the weirdness in the hospital? Hamlin does. He's seen some weird stuff too, and we've talked about it more than once. He's become my right-hand man on days which Means he'll probably go looking for real security work any day now. Can you tell him to keep an eye peeled for our red-scrubbed friend? Sure, but aren't you guys like best friends? Can't you just set up an orderly signal or something? I laughed. Honestly, I just sort of bump into him most of the time. But I need to talk with him. If you or your man Hamlin see him, just let me know, okay? Carl said he would, and we said goodbye as I turned back to Marcus, who followed me to the elevator. I've got someone looking out for him. They'll let me know if he shows up. I assume you're staying here. Yeah, I want to be here when Grandpa's doctor comes in. He's healing well, but he's old, so it's always dicey. He could get MRSA or some kind of respiratory infection like he had last year. I'll probably catch a nap sometime in between, but if your friend shows up, give me a call, okay? We swapped phone numbers as I told him I would text him straight away. See if you can request a new room, I said on a whim. If they move him, then this might all be for nothing. I'll try, Marcus said. If it's later on, then I might have someone else who could help us. A friend. Well, more than a friend. It appears you'll get to meet my fiancée, I suppose. Just try not to stare. She's quite a looker. You've been hanging with old men too much, bud. You're starting to pick up their slang, I told him with a laugh. I left then, heading home to get some rest, and when my phone chirped a little later, I saw that I had slept till almost 6 p.m. It was Carl, and when I picked up, I heard his end of a conversation with someone else. Hey, we found him. He's on the 4th floor, and he seems to be, waiting for something, so you might have a small window of time. I thanked him and sent a text to Marcus, who told me to meet him at the lobby in 10. The room move is a no-go. Apparently, they're full up on that floor, but I suspect his doctor simply wants him to move as little as possible. See you in 10. I'll get you something from the cafeteria. Glimmer and I are just finishing up dinner. I didn't know who Glimmer was, but I told him to get me whatever, and I headed out. They were waiting for me when I got there, Marcus and a tall woman in a long coat. The hood was up, but when she pushed it back, I was enchanted. She was like some D&D elf from the source book. Her skin was smooth and translucent, like it had been spun from glass, and her hair was long and pale, wound into a tight braid. She smiled at me as she stuck a hand out, Marcus offering me a box of food as I shook the offered hand.
It's wonderful to meet you. My love has spoken very highly of you. I understand you may have need of a hunter.
We headed for the stairs, but Glimmer stopped before we could go into the stairwell. Glim, are you coming? Marcus asked. Glimmer shook her head like a horse that smelled danger.
No, and you shouldn't either. Is there another way to get there?
I licked my lips and tried not to make my eyes track to the staff elevator. Yeah, but it has its dangers, too. Glimmer put a single hand on the frame of the door and slid it up and around.
How often do you travel this way?
I thought about it. I guess pretty regularly. I'd say maybe 2 or 3 times a day sometimes.
Then you are brave indeed. This is a way between, a passage into the spirit world. Sometimes it connects to the place you want, but I would wager that sometimes it takes you to places even you hadn't expected, does it not?
I thought again about David and Francis and nodded. Yeah, sometimes it does, though it's never done it to me.
Hunter, has Fisher ever shown you the spell for anchoring? The one that, how do you say it, keeps you here in this place?
Marcus nodded. Yeah, he said, taking a marker out of his pocket and drawing a symbol on the back of his hand. He touched it, closing his eyes as he mumbled something quietly before moving on to Glimmer. The symbol didn't burst into sparks or glow or anything, but I felt that little buzz again and understood that whatever he had done, it had been some kind of magic. He repeated the process with Glimmer, maybe lingering over her hand a little longer than he needed to, and when he reached for me, I put my own hand out tentatively. He sketched something on the back of it, something with a lot of angles and curves, and when he touched it, I almost pulled it away. It was like a half-second clap of static electricity, and it felt like someone had put the shape onto my skin by electrolysis. I looked down at it, marveling at the strange symbol that, I hoped, hadn't been stamped onto my skin for keeps. Do you mind if I get a picture of it? I asked, taking out my phone. Marcus chuckled. I'll do you one better than that. After this is over, I'll show you how to do it yourself. Really? I mean, can you? Like, what if I don't have the knack? We started climbing the stairs, and then it was odd how normal it felt. Generally, when I climbed the stairs, it felt like, I don't know, like eyes were watching me, but now it just felt like a staircase in any other place. I'd never noticed it right on top before. Maybe it was something I had just become used to, but now that it was gone, it was like living after a debilitating illness. It felt strange because it was gone, but it feels weird that it feels weird. I'll have to do better with things like that if I'm going to write a competent book about this place. That sounded pretty elementary right there. There isn't really a knack, Marcus explained as we climbed. Everyone has magic in them. We are creatures that are willing conduits for it. But sometimes we just need a push towards it. We grow up believing in magic, well, most of us do, but when we don't see any of it right up close, we start to doubt it. It took a long time to get where I am, but it was a journey I don't regret starting. It was definitely life-changing, and it brought me closer to my grandfather. If you can teach me, I don't mind learning. Something like that would be helpful around here, I told him, pushing the door open for the 4th floor as we headed in. We found him on a couch in the waiting room for the ICU, and he looked up with a smile as we came in, like he'd been expecting us.
My latest charge decided to linger on a bit, but I had thought that if I waited, I might get a chance to speak with you. It looks as if you've brought friends. Are they in the know?
Yeah, they know what's up. But when I turned back to Marcus, his eyes were wide, and Glimmer was reaching for something under her coat. Something I couldn't see. John, step back over here, Marcus hissed. What? I asked, looking at him like he was crazy. This is who we've come to see. This is my friend, the orderly. He helps people cross over. He puts spirits to rest.
That is no man. He is a boatman, the Red Fox, a harbinger.
The orderly rolled his eyes.
Oh, please. The legends around my kind have been inflated beyond recognition. I do, however, quite like the one about the Red Fox. It makes me sound clever, and it was why I chose these trappings.
He caught sight of the mark on my hand then, and smiled wetly, his strange teeth gleaming in the soft light overhead.
Did you do that? He asked Marcus. That's some solid spellcraft, boy. You should be proud.
Oh, I can do better than that, Marcus growled, and I will, if you persist in needling me. John, have you made a contract with this creature? I shook my head. No, he's never offered me one. The orderly snorted.
I am no demon wizard. I do not collect the souls of the dead and sell them or bind them. I move them on to what comes after. I am neither white nor black. I am gray, which is a prerequisite for a job such as this. I do not intend to bind your friend either. He is free to seek me out when and if he chooses, just as I am.
Marcus looked at Glimmer, but she didn't dare look away from the orderly. I don't sense a lie. His kind are often incapable of out-and-out falsehood. I think perhaps he may not be like the other.
Other? The orderly asked. You have encountered another of my kind, then?
Marcus nodded. My grandfather entered a contract with one of your kind. It calls itself the Weldergeist. The orderly, someone I had rarely seen flustered, which is saying something since I'd seen Carl hold a gun on him, seemed to vibrate with agitated energy.
That one is a poor example of our kind. I'm sorry that you and your kin have run afoul of him. He is a cautionary tale to other guides, something that could happen to any of us if we chose to step from the path. His aura is decidedly black, and if your grandfather has made a contract with him, then I wish him luck in breaking it. Power and knowledge are something that should be shared, not a currency to be traded.
Marcus seemed to unbristle, and Glimmer stood up straighter, though she kept her hand on whatever was in her coat.
So, what brings you here tonight? I assume there is something you required, since you put the turnkey on my tail.
Yeah, sorry about that, I said. We need to get you a cell phone or a bat signal or something. We're looking for help with room 301.
And I have already told you that I will not step foot in there. To do so would be the end of me, and I am needed here for a while longer.
We just need to know how someone could protect themselves if they had to stay there. Maybe some wards or something. Maybe some kind of anchoring. The orderly thought about it, but bobbed his head in an undecisive way a moment later.
I honestly have no idea. The room is connected to the desme of a powerful spirit, and I'm not sure that outer wards or charms would be of much use. The problem is being in the room itself, and she holds sway over it. It is possible that he could be anchored there, maybe even made invisible to her, but I don't know. She is very angry and very lonely, and I don't know what can be done to stop her.
I looked at Marcus, and he shrugged. It's a start. Maybe we can ward him up, and he'll be okay until they send him home. How much longer is he staying? I asked, feeling like I wouldn't like the answer. A week, at the least. The doc says he's healing, but he's old, and they want to monitor him. He tells them that I'm home with him all day, but they want him checked by a doctor until they're sure his hip is going to set okay. Well, at least he isn't going to stay long term. Tell that to Grandpa. You'd think he's in prison the way he carries on.
I wonder if I might ask a favor,
the orderly said suddenly. Marcus stiffened again, but the orderly put his hands out placatingly.
No, not a deal, not a contract, just a favor. I could use your help tonight, he said,
as he turned to me.
And if your magically inclined friend wants to help too, it would be of great help.
What do you need? I asked.
The higher-ups have decided that it is time to collect the Boiler Man. He's becoming more agitated, closer to crossing the line into something dangerous, and they want him moved on.
He swallowed, picking his words carefully.
I think it would be prudent to have someone else there too, a a second pair of hands. I've spoken to him before, and he can be very intense. Maybe you could talk to him, let him know there is something beyond this, something better."
I thought about it, nodding finally. "I can do that, but I want your help with room 301, if I do."
"I already told you.
You told me there was no way you could go inside, but there may still be something that you can do. If the little girl's spirit won't move on, is there some way that we can detach her? What did you call it? A desme? If we detach her desme from the room, then maybe we can stop her from having access to the people inside." The orderly nodded.
"It's possible. There is a way to separate the desme from the anchor that attaches it to the world. I must tell you, however, that it would also detach the spirit, and whoever might be inside the place, they would spiral off into nothingness, forever adrift between this place and the next."
I didn't much like the sound of that, but it was our only real option. The chimes came on overhead, alerting people that there was an incoming announcement, and it was weird to hear Charles, the other guy who worked a night shift, come across the speaker. "Code Blue, 4 North, room 32. Code Blue, 4 North, room 32.
"That's my cue," the orderly said,
getting up and heading for the door.
"This won't take long. I should be ready to proceed into the basement around 9, if that works for you."
I nodded, looking over at Marcus. "Does that work for you? Wasn't like I had anything else going on tonight."
"Excellent," the orderly said. "I'll bring the instructions for untethering when I return, just in case you decide to take that route."
He left then, and the Code Blue was canceled not long after. Security called up to 4 North to assist. Translation: security needed to be there to sign for a death on the floor. "Let's talk to Gramps," Marcus said, "so we can see what he thinks. Maybe he's got some insight into all this." It looked like we had some time to kill anyway, so we went back to 301 to see Grandpa. He smiled when he saw Glimmer, saying it was good to see her, and we filled him in on what we had learned. He nodded, he listened, and when he was finished, he sighed and leaned back into bed.
"Desmes are dangerous places, to be sure. There are ways to ward against them, but not many. I think your friend is right. Our best way is to try to make sure the ghosts don't see us. It's tricky stuff, ward-wise."
How would we even do something like that?" Marcus asked.
"Without the proper materials, it's next to impossible."
"What do you need? I can go home and get the stuff."
"Son, you'd need grave soil, ashes from a funeral pyre, and herbs that could kill you if you touched them with your bare hands. We'd have to use the ash to make symbols on the wall, spread the herbs and the grave soil around the bed, and anyone who was staying in the room would need to stay in the bed until dawn."
"So I'll wear gloves," Marcus said, not understanding. Grandpa just laughed all the harder.
"Kid, they check on me twice an hour and take blood 4 times a night on average. How long do you think I'll be allowed to sit here in a room full of dirt with ash on the wall? They find me like that, and I'll be lucky if I don't wind up down in Laurelwood. No, we'll have to try something a little more analog."
What we ended up doing was using Grandpa's buck knife and some leather squares he had in his kit to make some charms. Grandpa hung 2 around his neck, a 3rd by the door, and a 4th over the bed. He seemed dubious about whether it would help or not, but he said that it would just have to work.
"We'll just have to hope for the best,"
he said, checking his watch before asking,
"Don't you boys have some business to attend to?"
I checked the clock, and sure enough, it was 10 till 9. Glimmer wanted to come with us, but Marcus told her to wait with Grandpa. She didn't seem to like that, but Marcus was adamant that someone needed to stay here with him. Maybe if there's someone here, they won't be able to take him. Keep an eye on him until we get back, and then maybe we can make a better plan. He glanced over at his grandfather, sleeping soundly against his thin hospital blanket. Keep him safe, Glim. He choked up a little, and she put a hand on his shoulder.
I know. He is a lot of things to so many of us. Good hunting, my love.
We left her, sitting in one of those uncomfortable hospital chairs, and went about our work. Carl met us at the door to the maintenance room, David standing close by and looking grumpy. Marcus stood a little behind me, standing back as he let me talk to my people. The orderly hadn't shown up yet, but I knew that he would. I'd sent Carl a text about what we intended to do, and he agreed to meet us here. He must have told David, and I could already tell that he was going to ask to come along, something we couldn't allow. This would be strange work already, and we needed no one involved who wasn't in the know. I was only barely in the know, but I think I would have traded places with him if I could. "Are you ready?" Carl asked. "We're waiting on one more," I said. "The orderly's coming with us, too." "And me," David said, crossing his arms over his chest like he wouldn't have any argument. "Not this time," I told David, and when he started to respond hotly, I cut him off. "There's nothing for you down there, David. If you let us go down there, I can guarantee that you won't have any more problems with the boiler man, unless you want us to just leave him down there." David pursed his lips. "You know that's not what I want. It's been getting worse down there lately, but I can't prove it's him." "Worse how?" Marcus asked. "Well, it's getting colder. The boilers will need to be running at full capacity soon. I went to check on them yesterday, and some of them have been tampered with. Wires cut, circuits screwed up, things messed with, and I can't explain how or why. The cameras show that no one's been down there other than me, and I know I didn't do it, so just how the hell did it happen?" "You know how it happened," said a voice behind me, and Carl and David gritted their teeth as the orderly came towards our little group. "The boiler man is slipping into the territory where spirits become poltergeists. Once that happens, there is no going back for him, and their actions become even more destructive until they start taking lives. Once they start killing, they never stop, not until they are stopped." "And you can stop him," David said, trying to sound stoic, but barely making it to indignant. The orderly nodded. "I believe I can, and if I can't, then I think they can. This ghost house is filling up. I know you all feel it. It's never going to stop, but unless you want a ghost like that sad girl every few feet, then we need to start getting rid of the more powerful ones. That's what the higher-ups think, at least, and I agree with them. So, gentlemen, can I do my job now?" Carl and David looked at each other, and Carl shrugged at him. In response, David sighed and slammed his key into the lock before pushing the door open. "Fine, but don't mess with the boilers. It's hard enough to keep this place going." "Thanks," I said. I'm not trying to cut you out for no reason, David. I just don't want you to get hurt." He nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. We descended into the darkness, the three of us staying close as we went into the basement. "Should have brought a flashlight," I said to myself. The basement was pitch black. Suddenly there was a bright light from beside me, and I looked over to see Marcus holding a ball of light in his hand. It was roughly the size of a baseball, the center rippling with light like a constantly melting ice cream cone. He was holding it like it had no heat or weight, and when he saw me looking, he smiled. What? I'm a wizard, hoss. Magic, mystery, subtle, quick to anger, never late or early, etc., etc. I snorted. Well, it makes a good party trick, to be sure. He opened his mouth to say something else, but that was when something heavy fell near the back of the basement, and we all felt our sphincters tighten a little more than usual. Well, 2 of us did, I suppose.
Come on, the orderly said. He knows we're here, so we might as well get on with it.
We followed him into the basement, Marcus holding his light high as we came behind the orderly. The basement was a creepy spot where I certainly wouldn't want to spend any more time than I absolutely had to. It stretched most of the length of the bottom floor, and the lights down here were hit or miss most of the time. It made for a creepy spot, with a lot of lumpy machinery in the way, and even more dark corners for things to hide in. Only one particular thing hung out down here, so that was a blessing. But the spirit who resided down here was nastier and more nerve-wracking than most of the others in the hospital, so that was less exciting. The few shaky lights that were working down here went out abruptly about the time we got to the bottom of the stairs, and the light cast by Marcus's light ball made murky shadows around the edges of our circle. We moved in between the line of boilers, listening for the sound of our target. He was usually much more vocal than this, but the sounds of almost maddening quiet hung about the place like a fog. "It's quiet," Marcus said. "If you finish that statement, I'll kill you myself," I growled at him.
It's been a while since I had to guide a genuine wizard. The last one died at a children's birthday party, the orderly said offhandedly.
"How exactly did that happen?" Marcus asked, turning his head as something scuffed the concrete nearby.
"Heart attack. It was a shame, really. He was just about to conclude his grand finale, but I guess it truly became his finale in the end."
I snorted. I couldn't help it. We stopped suddenly, the orderly putting up a hand as we listened. "What?" I asked, glancing around unsure.
"I could have sworn I heard."
Suddenly, we were in a cloud of burning steam as it enveloped us, and I jumped back in time to avoid getting a faceful. My right arm was certainly going to be tender tomorrow, but if it bothered the orderly, he didn't show it. The left side of him was a little redder, but it was hard to tell. He was so pale that some of the color from his scrubs could be picking up on his skin. I turned, looking for Marcus, but he was nowhere to be found. I glanced back at the steam cloud and realized his ball of light was still in there. The orderly put a hand on me.
"If he's in there, then he's got some serious burns."
"Well, we've got to get him out of there. We can't just let him cook." The steam petered out, dissipating as it crept towards the ceiling, and I saw something with more density gathering around our resident wizard. He was crouched, a glowing circle stretching around his body, and as he looked up to see us watching him, he seemed to realize that whatever this was had worked. I sighed, looking relieved as he walked back towards us, droplets falling from the outside of his shield. "Close one," he said, stumbling against me as something hit the outside of his glowing dome. The wrench hit the ground with a clatter, sending up dust from the unused walkway, but it wasn't alone for long. Marcus set his feet as a screwdriver bounced off, then a pair of pliers, a set of vice grips, a saw, another wrench, and a whole toolbox. Marcus was trying to keep his defenses up, but the cracks were already starting to show. "If you guys are going to do something, now would be the time," Marcus yelled. In the shadowy depths of the basement, I could see something moving around. It was dressed in filthy overalls, a cap snugged down over its misshapen head, and as it moved into the depths between a pair of boilers, I caught a glimpse of the burned flesh and the white bone beneath. He limped slightly, one foot twisted, but if the limp slowed him down, it didn't show. This was him, the boiler man, and it seemed less likely than ever that we would get him to come with us. He was angrier than I'd ever heard of him being, and our arguments were likely to fall on deaf ears. "We need to get closer," I shouted to Marcus, and he gritted his teeth as he pushed out the cracks in his shield.
"I don't know if he will let us,"
the orderly said, and I missed a few words over the sound of tools hitting Marcus's shield.
"I don't even know if we can,"
Marcus said, gritting his teeth as the perspiration showed on his forehead. He appeared then, standing at the end of the row of boilers, his burning eyes focused on the dome of glowing motes that were keeping his victims safe.
"Ram him,"
I yelled.
"Excuse me?"
Marcus said, looking back skeptically.
"Ram him."
Marcus groaned, but nodded, running forward as he strained to keep the shield in place. The tools slammed against the shield, sending up sparks as we got closer. The boiler man screamed, tossing the toolbox at us as well. Marcus stumbled a little as the box slammed against the shield, but he kept going. The shield slammed into the ghost and pushed him against the wall. The boiler man bucked and pushed, trying to toss us off, but Marcus dug in his heels as we held him in place. The barrier was beginning to buzz like a neon bar light, and a vein was ticking in the mage's forehead.
"Do something,"
Marcus growled, his teeth threatening to break as he ground them together. I bit my lip, trying to make a plan, but nothing was coming.
"Do something,"
Marcus screamed, the boiler man pushing a hand through the shield to take a swipe at Marcus. He leaned away from him, the fingers swiping the air inches from his face, and I made a snap decision. It wasn't something I would ever be sure of, and it was something that could have backfired very badly, but I reached out and grabbed his hand. I expected my hand to slide through his, but it didn't. Our fingers interlaced, almost like lovers, and I was overtaken by a bright flash of light. Suddenly, I was standing in the dusty place, watching an unburnt maintenance man as he worked on the boilers. He jumped a little as he noticed me, putting a hand on his heart before laughing. It was definitely the same man, the one that had been throwing tools and trying to swipe my new friend's face off, but he was new, unblemished, and not turned by years of isolation. This was the boiler man that the hospital had known before his tragic accident.
"Scared me half to death. How'd you get down here? I could have sworn I locked that door."
"I came down here for you," I said, not sure what to do, but just kind of making it up as I went along.
"For me?" he asked, standing up and wiping his hand over his overalls. "For what?"
"Management, sent me. They said it was time for you to take a break."
He sniffed. "They would. I wish I had time, but I got way too much to do down here. These boilers don't maintain themselves, and I gotta keep this place shipshape."
He went back to his work, and when I bent down to put a hand on his shoulder, he turned around angrily.
"I said no,"
he snarled, his face shifting. Suddenly, he was the scarred and angry man that I'd seen before, the angry ghost that haunted the basement. But I wasn't about to quit now. "Look, you've been working on these boilers long enough. It's time to let it go."
"Impossible," he snarled, standing up as he gripped his wrench like a club. "Who will keep this place running? Who will maintain the boilers if I don't?"
"My friend David, for one. There are new maintenance guys, more even than there were in your time. It's okay for you to rest now. They can handle it." He took a step towards me, but faltered. How do you know that? Can't be that easy. I just leave? Just put down my wrench, just like that." "Just like that," I repeated, holding out a hand. "Come on. I know a guy who can show you the way. You've put your time in. How about a little retirement?" I know an electrician who would probably be happy to swap some stories with you." He looked like he wanted to get mad all over again, but instead, he let the wrench fall from his hand. "I guess I have been working pretty hard. Might be nice to take a rest." I kept my hand outstretched. "I'll show you the way." He took it, and suddenly we were back in the boiler room, Marcus leaning against his knees as he panted. The boiler man was back to his unburned self, standing before the orderly. They were both smiling, the orderly nodding as he extended his own hand to me. I took it, shaking, and felt something pass between his fingers and mine.
"Well done. I knew I was right to trust you. You will make a wonderful guide someday. Till then, take this. I think it will help you with what you need."
It was a small square of paper, and the runes on it were strange. I handed it to Marcus, the man nodding as he put it in his pocket, saying it looked like a rune or a sigil, and he'd have to study over it a little more. He suggested that we go talk to Gramps about it, and the orderly and the boiler man came with us as we went back up the stairs. Carl and David were waiting for us, and their eyes got real big when they saw the man in the overalls with the little flat-brimmed hat.
"Holy Jesus," Carl said. "Is that who I think it is?" "It is," the orderly said, "and he shouldn't bother you any longer. He and I are going to find him some rest, so the basement should be a little quieter now."
"Well, thank you," David said, turning to the boiler man. "I really didn't mean to bother you, bud. I had work to do." The boiler man nodded, offering him a hand. "Sean," he said. "Sean Mason." "David Caro," David said as he shook it. "Let people know. I don't think anyone remembers me as more than the boiler man these days." David nodded minutely, clearly uncomfortable. I'll tell him. Maybe we can get you a plaque in the remembrance hallway." "That'd be lovely," the boiler man said. Sean said, and then turned to the orderly so the two could leave.
"I will come back to check on you," the boiler man said to me, "just in case you make any headway with the girl."
He and the boiler man left, heading for the stairwell beside the staff elevator, and Carl turned to ask me what he was talking about. "The spirit in 301. There may be some way that we can stop it from eating people, but we've got to be quick now. The guy in there now knows some things that can help us, so we're hoping he can do the job. Be ready, though, in case some weirdness happens, all right?" Carl nodded. "You've been solving all my problems tonight, it seems. Still, don't think I'll be able to go into that basement, though." We said our goodbyes and headed up the stairs. "The ward seems sound," Marcus said after looking at it, "but it's a clean break. If we do this, I don't think there's any coming back for the people that are there." I shrugged. "We'll burn that bridge when we come to it. For now, let's have Gramps take a look at the..." But when we came into the room, we knew something was amiss. The bed was there, the covers set for someone who was laying beneath them, but Grandpa was gone. There was no sign of Glimmer either, and Marcus began to hyperventilate as he searched the very empty room. There was no one, nothing. Everyone was gone. "Gramps?" he called, like he thought he might be in the bathroom. "Glimmer?" But Gramps, it appeared, was gone. In retrospect, I probably should have seen this coming. This place usually does things at the worst possible time. "Gramps?" Marcus asked, looking around frantically. "Glimmer," he said, and I had to shush him a little. We don't want to cause a scene. Hospital's on thin ice with all the disappearances. One more person goes missing, and that's my grandpa you're talking about, Marcus said, a dangerous tone entering his voice. Be extremely careful about how you... But when the toilet flushed in the bathroom, we both turned expectantly. Glimmer came out, fixing her garments, and jumped a little when she saw us.
You're back. Thank goodness. Did everything go as... Where is Fisher?
Marcus wrapped his arms around her and pulled her to him, apparently as afraid for Glimmer as he had been for his grandfather. We got back and he's gone. I thought maybe you had been snatched too. Glimmer's eyebrows went up.
I was only in the bathing room for a few minutes. I had to make, and Hunter tells me it is not advisable to use the plants like I would at home.
I looked at Marcus, but he just shook his head at me. Regardless, it looks like they got him. What do we do now? Marcus looked at Glimmer, but she only shrugged. I guess we'll have to go in there after him, Marcus said. We can do that? I asked, not sure why we hadn't just done that from the start. Yeah, but it's dangerous. It'd be a lot easier to just untether it and let it float away. If we go inside the desme of a spirit, we have to play by the spirit's rules, or be prepared for a fight. If we die in there, we die for real, and our spirits are likely to get trapped in there too. If this is a big old angry spirit, especially one that's been eating people, then it probably has a whole lot of power. More than enough to swat you and I with, I would think. I blew out a breath, putting my head in my hands. Crap. How do we do this? I've got to find the entrance, and then we'll be able to create a doorway. Once that's done, I need someone to make sure that no one messes up the doorway while we're in there, or we'll get stuck.
I will be coming with you.
Glimmer said it like there would be no arguments on the matter, but Marcus immediately attempted to shut it down. Glim, we need someone to keep the door open.
And why must that be me? I am a warrior hunter, and I will protect you.
If some nurse comes along and messes this up, then we'll all be stuck inside this ghost's home turf. I don't doubt that you're a mighty warrior, but even you would have trouble here where we're going. That gave me an idea. I might have a way to keep people out of the room so that Glimmer can come with us. Marcus started to argue, but I pulled out my phone as I called up Carl. That was quick. I'm guessing you don't have good news. I brought him up to speed, and he said some words that would definitely have got him in trouble with administration. Don't worry, I told him, when he was still damning everything with an earshot. I've got a plan, but I need your help. If it keeps my ass out of the alligator den, then I'll do just about anything. Probably owe you more favors than you owe me at this point, so tell me what you need. I need the room to be closed off for a few hours. No one in, no one out. Once we're done, I need someone to clean up the mess, too. Okay, I'll grab David and put someone from custodial on notice. How long you need? Let's say 3 hours, I said, doing the math and looking at Marcus, who nodded after a little thought. We can do that. See you in 10. I put my phone away and told my companions that we'd have help in about 10 minutes. Well, I guess what we need then is to find the door, Marcus said. He began running his hands over the walls, eyes closed, while Glimmer sat pensively on the bed. The two were pointedly not speaking to each other, and I supposed I could see where Marcus was coming from. He and Glimmer were clearly very close, and he didn't want her to get hurt. If I had someone I felt that strongly about, I wouldn't want them to get hurt either. But she was clearly used to danger, maybe even magical danger. Marcus would need to check that sort of behavior if he meant to keep her by his side. But honestly, none of that was any of my business. Marcus stopped suddenly, his hand over the left back corner, and he started moving furniture out of the way. Glimmer came to help, but when she couldn't make the bed move, I went to help her with the parking brake. We got the space as empty as we could and Then Marcus took out a pen and began to draw on the wall. He drew a door, complete with knob and hinges, and added some runes and sigils for good measure. Then he stepped away, looking at the door and nodding. Yeah, that's how they're getting in. There's a door between those two corners. But you just drew that, I said, not really understanding. True, but the door on the other side is just as real as the one that leads into this room, and the person opening it is a lot more skilled than I am. See now why you'd be needing a cleanup crew, came a voice from the door. I turned to find Carl and David walking in. The custodians are not going to be happy about that. They might be happier when they stop losing cleaners to the room, though I can't promise they won't still lose them to the other anomalies. Marcus reached out and touched the knob, and I gasped as it grew full in his hand. The edges began to take on dimensions, the door growing from the wall, and the runes and sigils grew with the light as they helped it come into being. Soon the wall had sprouted a very regal-looking door, all dark wood and smooth angles, and Marcus looked back at Carl as he waved Glimmer and I over. Remember, don't let anybody touch this, and under no circumstances should they close the door. If the door becomes unstable, we could get stuck in there. People might come out. If they do, just get them to sit and stay calm. Hopefully, we'll be able to get a few people out before we cut this place off. What he didn't say was that he hoped one of them would be his grandfather. Ready? Marcus asked, and as he opened the door, I saw Glimmer slide one of the large, uncomfortable-looking chairs in front of it. David took a seat, saying that he would keep it open until we got back, and the three of us went inside. I'd expected some kind of sensation, cobwebs or plastic drapes or something, but it was no more uncomfortable than walking into the bathroom from my living room. The other side was, well, honestly a lot more regal than I had thought it would be. The hallway was more like a palace corridor, hanging swags and tabards, windows looking out over immaculate gardens, and suits of armor that lined the halls. The carpets were plush red, incredibly thick and very soft. Little chandeliers hung from the ceiling every few feet, and they were lit by actual candles. I expected to look out the window and see a unicorn or a dragon go by. It was very medieval times, but it was kind of cool, too. I had a pretty good idea of who had made this, and you had to give her credit. The place was certainly dramatic. I guess we're going down the hallway, Marcus said, glancing to the left and seeing a dead end. I shrugged. Doesn't seem like we have much of a choice. The farther down we got, the more I started hearing chamber music, the plinky sound of something old, something played on a harpsichord or those boxy little pianos you see in Game of Thrones sometimes. I could vaguely hear the clink of china as well, and soft talk that wafted across our senses like mouse feet. We came into a large room full of little tables, stacked high with tea things and packed with people who clearly hadn't signed up to be here. They were eating off tall, trestled things full of tea cakes, drinking from cups and pouring from multiple pots that sat on the table. The people were all dressed like courtiers from some French painting, powdered wigs, pancake makeup, and exaggerated dresses and suits with a lot of buttons. They were talking in low voices, but their eyes kept drifting up to the dais in a nervous way that children might look at an abusive parent while they're watching TV or doing something that has caused the kiddo to be forgotten for a moment. On the dais was the subject of their fear. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, her head full of tightly curled brown ringlets. She had a crown, something that looked absurd on someone her size, and she was bedecked in a gown that would have put a queen to shame. She had a leg cocked up on the arm of her throne, her eyes boring into the impotent old man who stood before her. She was glaring at him in the way that people look at dogs who have tracked in something nasty, and when Marcus sucked in a breath, I realized who it must be. He was standing tall, his hip not broken in this place, and he was dressed in wizard's robes and carrying a staff. Grandpa looked like a defiant Merlin in this sulky child's court. "I told you I'm bored. Do some tricks for me, wizard. The queen demands it." "And I told you," Grandpa said, his voice small but conveying a certain amount of that suffer-not-a-fool depth that made you believe he was a force to be reckoned with, "that I do not perform tricks." "You will perform what I tell you to perform," the little queen barked, "or I will send you to drift in the abyss. This is my kingdom, and I rule here." "Even a queen may die," Grandpa said, and when he smacked his staff on the ground, the floor shook. She rose from the throne, floating to her feet as she swung her ornate scepter. "So can wizards," she said, the air crackling around her. The people having tea went completely silent, most of them shaking as they watched the two square off, and I wondered how we could be of help here when Glimmer pulled a long knife out of her belt and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder.
"We have to help him. That girl is much more than she seems."
Marcus nodded, swallowing loudly. "Agreed. John, stay low. Try not to get killed." The two of them ran for the dais, and I was kind of just left to watch. I imagine it was how normal people felt during superhero fights. The girl threw herself at Grandpa, moving like a puppet as she just sort of bonelessly floated towards him, and he threw up a shield to block her as she came in. As strong as she was, you could feel the energy radiating off the old man. He was no slouch, and when he pushed her back with a gust of wind and a flick of his wrist, she moved. Marcus moved up beside him, throwing up a shield so that he could attack, but it was Glimmer who really stole the show. She was quick, blinking in and out as she struck at the girl, but the little queen seemed to get that clunky scepter in the way of her strikes. "Coward!" she shouted at the old man, throwing Glimmer off as she tried to leap on her. "You need all of this to beat a little girl?" "You are no child," Grandpa growled, and I saw a long, crackling arc of energy come snaking from the end of his staff as he snapped it in her direction. She ducked it, sending a wave of something dark and putrid towards him, but Marcus was ready with another of those energy domes. They were trying to back her into a corner, trying to trap her so that she couldn't jump around, but she refused to be caged. At one point, she jumped over Marcus and his grandpa and swiped at the back of the old man's head with that huge scepter. Glimmer got her a second before the shield did, and I heard her grunt in pain as she tried to redirect the brunt of the strike. It was getting vicious up there, the power being thrown around, rippling the tablecloths, and I didn't see any end in sight. The three of them were good, but that kid was a powerhouse, and her power felt meaner than theirs. As I stood there, watching them slam into each other, I took a look at some of the people who were sitting around watching them too, and figured out something that I could do. Starting with a couple of older ladies, their dresses clearly quite hot from the amount they were sweating, I asked them if they might like to go with me. One of the women blinked. "What? You mean to a different part of the castle?" "No, I mean like back to the real world." The women looked at each other, nodded once as if they needed to think about it, and then followed me quietly from the room. It was far easier than I had thought it would be, actually. Believe it or not, most of them wanted to leave. In many cases, a table beside the one I had asked would hear what I was doing and ask if they could join us. You had to get pretty close to tell, but there were definitely some of them that were not going to return to normal lives. If you've seen the movie Beetlejuice, it was like the corpses that are turning to dust at the end of the movie. Their souls were shriveled, their power drained nearly to the limit, and they would need escorting further than room 301. They were content to stay in the room until it was all done, however, and they mingled with the living quite well. Most of their nice clothes turned into hospital gowns once they were out the door, and David's eyes got a little big when I kept leading them in. He sat patiently enough, though, as the room started to fill up. I got about 40 out in all, and I started to wonder where the rest might be. used up to nothing, I suppose, and I half expected to see little piles of dust under some of the chairs. They had fought throughout, clashing again and again, but as the people left, I started to notice our less than gracious host beginning to slow down. Her movements were less precise, her strikes less quick and decisive, and when Glimmer struck, she barely caught it on her scepter before Grandpa pushed her into a wall with a phantom monsoon. She crumpled to the ground, trying to focus enough to shove out with more quick and dirty power, but Glimmer pinned her arm with a foot as the three gathered around her.
"It's over, Your Majesty," Grandpa said with a chuckle. I don't think so," she said, but when she glanced out at the gallery, she noticed that no one was left watching.
"What? Where are my subjects? What did you do?" The two magi and whatever Glimmer was looked out across the tea room, and all eyes fell to me.
"You! What have you done? Explain yourself!"
It was clearly meant to hold a great deal of menace, but it just came out sounding whiny and a little afraid. "I just took them out," I said. "They wanted to leave. No one really wants to be here. You took them out of their lives, and now some of them won't get to go back to them." I thought she was laughing for a moment, her gasps easily mistaken for chuckles, till she started crying. "What about me? I don't get to return to my life. How is that fair?" I came up to the dais, wondering if I might be able to get lucky again. I extended a hand, putting it on her heaving shoulder, and we were suddenly transported away from the opulent castle and into a very familiar room. She wasn't in a fancy dress now, just a drab hospital gown. There were tubes running into her, an oxygen mask over her mouth, and her eyes had dark circles under them. She looked like she was on death's door, and I suppose she was. Was this the little girl that the orderly had met? Was this the angry little girl that had started all the trouble? "So, what happens to me?" she asked, glowering up from her hospital bed. "What do I do now?" "You could go with them," I said, "but the party's over. There's not going to be any more high tea, or any more abducting people from their rooms you died in either." "Shut up," she spat. "You died," I reiterated, "and you need to figure that out. You aren't just going to magically stop being dead, no matter how many people you gobble up. You're dead, and it's time to move on." "And what?" she asked, looking out the window sullenly. "Rot in the ground? You've been separated from your body for a long time. You've likely already rotted away in whatever grave they put you in." That seemed to be something that she hadn't thought of yet, and when she looked up from her bed, she seemed to have resigned herself. "I guess my chances of getting into heaven are pretty slim." I shrugged. "Not even sure there is a heaven. I'm not sure about any of it. I know that there's a man who takes you there, and he seems to be the one who decides where to take you. I have no doubt that he'll be there when we come out of this place, so I suppose that he'd be the one to ask." She was quiet for a moment, and when I extended a hand, she leaned back a little. "Will you come with me?" She kept leaning away, treating me like I might be sick with something catching, before she finally extended a shaky hand and took mine. "Okay. Don't see as I have a lot of other choices." We came out of the room and were back in the castle again, my new friends still standing around her. "Let her up," I said, and all of them looked at me like I might be crazy. "Let her up," I repeated. "She's ready to go." "If we let her up," Marcus began, but I cut him off. "She won't." "How the hell do you know that?" he asked, turning to look at me. Grandpa laughed. "Sounds like he's in the know, just like us. Let her up, boy. I don't think she'd be too difficult to put down again if we had to." They let her up, he and Glimmer not seeming to like it, and I offered her a hand up. Her dress was gone, and she was the sick little girl in the hospital bed again. She took my hand shakily, getting to her feet as we took our first steps off the dais and turned to exit. The others came behind, arraying the girl and I, just in case. And as we headed for the hallway that would take us out, Grandpa came up beside me. "So, you've got the sight, don't you?" "The what?" I asked, not sure what he meant. "The sight. It allows you to see and interact with ghosts. I think you've got a little more than that, though," he said as he winked at me. "Maybe," I said, looking down at the girl in the hospital Johnny. "Maybe my foot," Grandpa said as we came to the door. "Maybe a talent like that needs to be nurtured, and maybe you could use a teacher." "More mutants for our little school, huh, Gramps?" Marcus said with a chuckle as we stepped out of Wonderland and back into the real world. I was unsurprised to find the orderly waiting for us when we came out, smiling and clapping as he shook his head at me. "You have proven to be a most interesting find, my friend. Every meeting you impress me a little more, and I am so glad I agreed to answer your questions." The little girl was shy around him, but after I talked to her a bit, she went with him willingly. This interested him all the more, and he took the small group of souls, the little girl by the hand, and they all went to the stairwell and vanished from the world as I knew it. Those who were still among the living, about 8 or 9 of them, left the hospital as they tried to put their lives back together. Those who returned were welcomed back with confusion and joy, and it made the paper a week later. It was considered to be a miracle or some kind of mass abduction, and they seemed to have no memory of what had happened to them, a condition that only happened after they left the Desme. Grandpa needed a hand back into bed, his hip going back to being broken when he came out too. He made a full recovery a few weeks later, and I was coming into work as they left. Marcus and I had spoken many more times over coffee, and he told me a lot about runes and sigils and the weird powers that I'd seen on display in the ghost realm. He told me that he had untethered it, saying that the orderly spell had worked perfectly, and there was no danger of anyone accidentally slipping in there again. As I came in and Marcus and Grandpa left, I said my goodbyes, and he handed me a card. "The address is on the back. Why don't you come and visit sometime? I'm sure we can buy a little more beer for our nightly talks. Maybe we can teach you something useful while we're at it." "Gramps, you just got out of the hospital," Marcus said. "Don't you think you need to be getting your strength back before you start taking on more pupils?" "Oh, he's not my student," Grandpa told him, looking back with a grin. "He's yours." "What?" Marcus asked. "No, wait a second. I never—" Yeah, complain all you want, boy. There's nothing better for growing power than a pupil to help you discover it. Besides," he said with a groan, "there may come a time that we can use all the help we can get. Another torch in the darkness is always a welcome sight." We said our see you laters then, and I let them get home while I went to work. Wizards, ghosts, magic, elves, it was a lot to take in, but as I sat at my desk and got started on my night, it honestly seemed like the most normal thing about this place. Just another day at Cashmere Medical Center.